My name is Maya Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a strategic security specialist for one of the top private protection firms in Washington, D.C. Sounds impressive? Not to my family. To them, especially my father, I'm just a glorified security guard in a fancy uniform. That's exactly what he said the day I returned home to Texas for my sister Chloe's over-the-top wedding. The golden child, the pride of the family. While she floated in on a cloud of admiration, I walked through the front doors and heard my father mutter to a guest, "Don't let her near the gift table. She's just security." That moment stung, but I didn't say a word. I just smiled, nodded, and took a seat at the table in the far corner because that's what I've always done. But by the end of that night, when armed criminals stormed the venue, when guests screamed, and lives were seconds from being destroyed suddenly, my job, and who I am, became the only thing that mattered. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about family, rejection, and redemption. I once read somewhere that a child abandoned emotionally by their family learns to light up their own world with a tiny flashlight, something no one else can see, and no one will ever truly understand how vital that light is. I understand that deeply. Because from a very young age, I lived in the overwhelming shadow of my older sister Chloe. Chloe is 3 years older than me, the kind of daughter any family would proudly show off to the neighbors. She was a top student, always at the top of her class, won the state's Outstanding Student Award in 11th grade, joined the baking club, volunteered at a nursing home, played the violin, and even delivered the graduation speech on behalf of her school. Whenever relatives came over, Mom would pull out her old silver laptop and proudly play Chloe's award-winning science presentation, while Dad would beam and say she was going to be a real leader. A perfect success story. Ah. And me? I was the daughter who couldn't sit still for more than 10 minutes. I liked climbing trees, taking apart electronics, and biking down dusty dirt roads with the boys in the neighborhood. I once punched a classmate for calling my friend the fat girl. I got sent to the principal's office for talking back to the teacher. Every time I got into trouble, Dad would sigh, shake his head, and look at me like I was an ink stain ruining the family's perfect portrait. Why can't you be more like Chloe? Gentle, obedient, well-behaved. Every time I heard that, something inside me turned a little colder. When Mom was still alive, she was the only one who truly saw me. She knew I loved the truth, loved justice, or more accurately, hated injustice. She once said that if I were a boy, I'd probably grow up to be a great cop. I remember the summer afternoons she'd take me to the library and sit with me for hours in the criminal justice and forensic science section. She never told me to stop dreaming. She only said, if you truly love something, chase it with everything you've got. But be kind, Maya. Don't let your anger be the cage that holds you forever. She was the only light that understood the glow inside me. But then Mom passed away when I was 14, taken by late-stage ovarian cancer. That was the first time I truly understood how brutal helplessness can be when the only person who ever held you in the dark was suddenly gone. After that, everything changed. So fast, I couldn't catch my breath. Just a year after the funeral, my father Charles remarried a woman named Diana, someone he had worked with on a real estate project in Austin. Diana was the perfect embodiment of the world my father aspired to. Elegant, rigid, and suffocatingly polished, she had a gentle smile but eyes that scanned me like a design flaw no one could fix. To her, I was a remnant of a former marriage, a burden she had to tolerate for the sake of the family's reputation. Chloe, on the other hand, was treated like her own daughter. Weekly shopping trips, smiling selfies captioned mother-daughter joy on Facebook, prom photos shared on Instagram with captions as long as a novel. Meanwhile, I was constantly corrected for every tiny thing. Maya, sit like a proper young lady. Why are you dressed like a boy? So you want to be a cop? A proper woman doesn't run around catching criminals. I still remember vividly the day I told my father I wanted to study criminal investigation at the University of New Mexico. I was nervous, but I had prepared everything. My application, transcripts, scholarship essay, even a detailed 4-year academic plan. But the moment I finished speaking, he let out a dismissive chuckle and said something that cut colder than a blade. "That's not a job for a serious woman. You plan to spend your life with handcuffs and guns? Those jobs are for men. You should find something more appropriate for a girl." I didn't argue. I just quietly folded the folder, went up to my room, locked the door, and for the first time in my life, cried like a child who had truly been orphaned. 3 days later, I left home with an old backpack, a few changes of clothes, and an enlistment letter from the United States Army that I had applied for on my own, without anyone knowing. I joined the military at 19. 4 years in tactical security forces taught me things no classroom ever could. Discipline, rapid judgment under pressure, combat skills, and most importantly, self-respect. The ability to see my own worth, especially when no one else would. After completing my service, I used the GI Bill to study international security at George Mason University. I graduated with honors, earned a nomination for an elite internship program, and eventually joined Sentinel Global Security, a private security firm specializing in high-profile events, international conferences, VIP protection, and federal risk analysis. I built my life not to prove anything to anyone, but because I knew if I didn't do it for myself, no one else would. And yet today, as I sat in the glowing banquet hall of a wedding reception, listening to my own father casually say, "She's just a security guard," it felt as though the last 10 years had never happened. Every effort, every achievement, every hard-won milestone crushed under those 5 weightless words, like an invisible slap, cold to the bone, and painful to the deepest root of the self-worth I had sacrificed my youth to protect. I'm not even sure why I agreed to come back. Maybe part of it was duty. Maybe part of it was a fragile hope that after all these years after I had stepped into the world, stood on my own 2 feet, and earned something truly worthy, my father and the family that once turned their backs on me would finally see me differently. But just hours after setting foot back in Texas, that hope began to fade like light in a fog. And by the time the rehearsal dinner rolled around, it had almost completely disappeared. The party was held on the resort grounds 2 days before the official wedding. Everything was lavish to the point of excess, from the silk ribbons tied around each chair to the gold-trimmed champagne flutes and the massive white orchid wall set up purely for Instagram photos. I arrived on time, wearing a sleek gray high-neck jumpsuit, my hair tied low, my face bare except for a hint of tinted lip balm. I came alone. Of course I did. There was no one to invite. And even if there had been, I wouldn't have dared bring them into a world so steeped in judgment. No one but me could understand what it felt like to be cast aside before even stepping into the room. When I reached the reception desk to ask about my seat, a young woman in a staff uniform smiled politely and said, "Oh, you must be Maya Thompson. Your seat is at table 19, at the back of the hall." I glanced at the chart and saw my name, Thompson, Maya, clearly grouped with distant relatives from out of state. Not the family table, not the head table, not where close ones sat. I asked carefully, "My family, which table are they at?" She replied quickly, "Table 1, near the stage. But I believe it's already full." A gentle way of saying no. I nodded, swallowed the lump rising in my throat, and walked toward the back of the hall, trying not to let anyone see how tightly I was clenching my fists. I sat down and tried to appear unfazed. Around me were extended relatives I'd never met before. Some glanced at me, then turned to whisper among themselves. No one spoke to me first. I sat there, sipping water, watching everyone from a distance like I was watching a movie starring my own family, while I remained just a spectator. Chloe walked into the banquet hall in a sleek white dress with daring cuts, arm in arm with her fiancé, a tall man with slicked back hair and the confident walk of someone in advertising. The whole room applauded. I clapped too. But at my table, no one noticed whether I did or not. My father, in a navy suit, hair slicked and polished, didn't miss a single chance to show off his eldest daughter. I watched him pull groups of guests toward Chloe and introduce her with visible pride on his face. This is Chloe, my eldest daughter, assistant marketing director in LA. She was just promoted to lead the new project team at Pure Glow. Guests gasped, shook hands, offered congratulations. Then, as if to maintain some kind of polite balance, he glanced over to where I stood nearby and said to a group nibbling on canopies, "And that one? Maya. She's a security guard. Somewhere in DC, I think. Not like Chloe." How withered. I stood still, offering a faint smile, a smile colder than the air conditioning blowing against my shoulder. An older woman, probably one of my father's friends, turned to me and asked gently, "Where do you work as a guard, dear? At a shopping mall?" I shook my head. "I work in VIP protection and high-level event security coordination." She nodded slowly, though her eyes couldn't hide the surprise and a hint of disappointment. "Oh, sounds very specialized." Another guest, while scooping salad onto their plate, asked bluntly, "So are you planning to go back to school and change careers? Being a guard must be tough, and probably not very stable, right?" I wanted to respond. To say that I graduated college with honors, that I had been awarded a certificate of merit by the National Security Agency, that the work I do once saved dozens of lives during a bomb threat at a major conference in New York. But instead, I simply smiled and replied softly, "I'm always learning. In this field, you never stop." But no one was listening. Because by then, they had already turned away to chat about Chloe's 3-carat engagement ring or her custom $16,000 gown from Italy. I returned to my seat in silence, once again feeling like my presence was just a small error in this otherwise perfect picture, a detail no one would notice missing. And I began to understand that, to them, I would never truly belong. Not because I didn't try, but because they were never willing to see who I really was. The evening passed in a haze of artificial cheer glasses clinking, polite laughter floating through carefully scripted conversations, warm golden lights casting a glow over the ceiling like a stage set too perfectly. I stayed at table 19, quietly holding my glass of water, sipping slowly, reminding myself to stay composed. I had grown used to being left out like this, so used to it, in fact, that it hardly even hurt anymore. But while everyone else was busy comparing dowries, admiring wedding rings, or posing for photos, something else caught my attention, the only thing that made me sit up straight and focus on instinct. A sign of danger. As everyone's eyes were turned toward Chloe and her fiancé being invited to the stage to speak, I noticed a man in a server's uniform carrying a tray of pastries. His movements weren't like the other staff, not the crisp, practiced rhythm you'd expect at an event this upscale. His uniform wasn't quite right either. The shirt was too loose, the tie hung crooked, the collar wrinkled, and, most importantly, he wore no name tag. I frowned. High-end venues like this, especially resorts, have strict standards for staff, uniforms, and conduct. Every employee is checked before serving guests. No name tag usually means one of two things: either he's brand new and hasn't received a badge yet, or he's not a real staff member. I started watching more closely. And then I spotted 2 more men in similar uniforms but with subtle differences: mismatched tie colors, buttons that didn't match the standard design. None of them wore name tags. And most importantly, the way they moved, they weren't serving tables in assigned sections. Instead, they walked in zigzagging patterns, looping around, and weren't carrying food or drinks like the rest of the staff. They drifted past the tables, scanning the room. Their eyes weren't on the guests, they were on things like handbags, the wedding gift table, the exits. I couldn't take my eyes off that group of men. In my mind, everything I had ever studied, trained for, and been drilled on throughout years of on-site security work was running on a loop. Identify abnormal behavior. Assess alertness levels. Compare target movement against standard behavioral patterns. I breathed slowly, trying to stay calm just as I had during high-level federal events. And then I saw something that made my skin crawl. One of them, the tall man in a black shirt, moved toward the side door of the banquet hall, pretended to check a dessert tray, then tilted his head slightly and whispered into an earpiece. A small black earpiece, barely noticeable unless you were standing close or knew exactly what to look for. But I recognized it immediately. It was a covert communication device. And that alone told me these weren't regular waitstaff. I pretended to head toward the restroom near the stage, but really, I was repositioning to get closer to the side entrance where the three men had just been. I tucked myself behind a large pillar wrapped in decorative string lights, about 6 meters away. Just then, I spotted one of them, the man wearing thin black gloves, standing beside the guy with the earpiece, speaking quietly. His voice was low, but not low enough to escape my ears. After the first dance. Gift table, split up, no one notices. My heart clenched. Just one sentence, but it was crystal clear. This was a planned robbery. And they had a timeline. They were waiting for the perfect moment when everyone's attention would be on the couple's first dance, when the lights would dim, when the music would drown out every other sound to split up, move fast, and hit the wedding gift table, which held dozens of envelopes, expensive jewelry, and even a small safe. I stepped back slightly, my back pressing against the wall. Years of experience in high-risk environments told me this was more serious than I'd thought. These weren't amateurs. They didn't speak loudly, they didn't flash weapons. They didn't look threatening. They were executing exactly the kind of soft assault model I'd seen deployed at major conferences, blending in with catering staff, moving in erratic patterns, avoiding the eyes of organizers, and launching a coordinated strike during the most vulnerable moment. I clenched my fists, my chest tightening like I'd just been doused in ice water. I scanned the room. My father was laughing with a group of business acquaintances. Chloe was taking selfies with her bridesmaids, all dressed in pale pink. No one had any idea what was about to happen. No one sensed the threat already inside this room. And once again, I realized no matter how many times people belittled me, no matter how often they reduced me to just a security guard, I was still the only one who could see what no one else could. And this time, I couldn't and wouldn't stay silent. I pulled my phone from my pocket, trying to steady my hands as I moved quickly toward the quiet hallway behind the banquet area. My heart was pounding like a military drumbeat. I dialed 911 and spoke clearly and firmly. My name is Maya Thompson, Strategic Security Specialist with Sentinel Global Security. I'm currently at Hillstone Resort, the venue for the Thompson-Harper wedding. There are clear indicators of an organized robbery being planned. I suspect at least 3 to 5 individuals have infiltrated the service staff. They're using earpieces and appear to be coordinating an approach to the gift table following the first dance. I said it all in one breath, my voice low but precise, every word slicing through the air like a blade. The dispatcher's tone immediately shifted into tactical mode. Copy that. Closest response unit is approximately 15 to 20 minutes out. Can you maintain communication and ensure the scene stays calm until officers arrive? I gripped the phone tightly, nodding even though they couldn't see me. I'll do my best. Please hurry. Then I ended the call and took a long, steadying breath like the first step into a live mission. Only this time, the people I needed to protect were the very ones who had once turned their backs on me. I returned immediately to the main hall and scanned for the resort's in-house security team, 2 men in black suits with radios, standing near the reception area, casually chatting with a beverage server. I approached directly, no hesitation, no small talk. Excuse me, who's in charge of security here? One of them, a man in his 40s, turned and looked me up and down as if I were just an annoying guest. Are you with the wedding party? Is something wrong? I reached into my chest pocket, pulled out my ID badge, and held it up. Maya Thompson. I work for Sentinel Global Security. I have reason to believe there are at least 3 unauthorized individuals embedded in your catering team, planning a coordinated robbery at the gift table in under an hour. They exchanged looks, then glanced down at my badge. The other man shrugged. You're saying robbery? But this is a wedding. No VIPs, no diplomats, no one worth taking that kind of risk for. Besides, we've already got 2 armed guards watching the gift table. I clenched my jaw. This was exactly what I'd seen at so many events before: naive overconfidence. They're not targeting a person, they're targeting valuables. This is a wealthy family wedding. Dozens of guests carrying expensive gifts, jewelry, cash envelopes. This is a calculated hit. They know the timing, the layout, and how to distract your team. Oh, I didn't wait for their reaction. I pulled out my phone, opened the resort floor plan I'd saved earlier, a habit I'd kept from every job I ever worked, and pointed to the entry points and service corridors. I need you to divide your personnel into 3 teams, one to monitor the gift table closely, one to secure the back doors and kitchen access, that's where I observed them using earpieces, and one to patrol the outdoor garden area, which is extremely vulnerable once guests step out for photos. Do not create a scene. Do not alert the guests. If they sense they've been compromised, they might retreat or worse, act recklessly. The man's name tag read Rick. I caught it just in time. He stared at me for a few more seconds, then gave a slow nod. He picked up his radio and began reassigning positions without explaining the real reason to his team. I could see the shift in his expression, suspicion turning into alertness. Maybe it was my voice, my eyes, or the strategic-level security clearance embedded in my ID card that convinced him I wasn't the kind of mall cop my father used to mock. I continued. If you have internal surveillance, I need quick access to your control room. At the very least, I need to confirm their locations and check if there are more of them. Police will be here in under 20 minutes. But if we wait until they make a move, things will get chaotic and 10 times more dangerous. Rick nodded and turned. Follow me. I walked behind him down a hallway behind the main event space. A small room opened up, filled with split-screen monitors showing the ballroom, entry points, hallways, and the gift table. I pointed, fast. Zoom in right there, that's him. The screen lit up with a clear image of the man wearing the earpiece. He was standing next to a cart full of champagne trays, but his eyes kept scanning the guests instead of focusing on his task. One hand rested lightly on the cart. The other hovered near his mouth, speaking softly into the earpiece. I drew a slow breath and turned to Rick. They're getting ready. And they're not alone. There has to be support outside, maybe a getaway vehicle, maybe someone at the rear exit. We've got 15 minutes. Maybe less, if they think the moment's already right. Rick swallowed, spoke quickly into his radio, then looked at me. I don't know who you are, but tonight I'm following your lead. I nodded. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. By the time I stepped out of the control room and made my way back toward the banquet hall, the music for the first dance had already started in the distance. Chloe and her fiancé were being called to the floor. The lights were dimming. The entire space had taken on a romantic, glowing warmth. But I knew these are the moments when things crack beneath the surface. And I, the one they once dismissed as just a guard, was now the only one standing between safety and chaos. The race had begun. And failure was not an option. Soft violin music filled the room, stretching out each second like a wire-pulled taut. Chloe and her fiancé stepped into their first spin of the opening dance. Golden lights flickered gently over the faces of the guests, smiling, raising glasses, lifting phones to capture the sweet moment this entire evening had been orchestrated to showcase. I stood quietly near the edge of the stage lighting, my eyes sweeping over every sector I had already marked. The gift table, the auxiliary kitchen entrance, the emergency exit, and the shadowed corner near the mini bar at the back of the hall. In my mind, the tactical map kept rotating, constantly updating. The moment the first dance ended, before the applause had even faded, all the main lights in the banquet hall flickered 3 times, then cut out completely for about 3 seconds. The flickering wasn't natural, it was a signal. And just as I'd predicted, when the lights came back on, 3 men burst forward from different directions, no longer dressed in waiter uniforms, no longer blending in. One of them pulled a handgun and fired a shot into the air, silencing the entire room. "Everyone get down," he shouted, his voice hoarse and commanding. "Hand over your phones and jewelry. Anyone resists, gets shot." Guests screamed, glass shattered, women shrieked in terror. A few people tried to scramble away but were stopped cold by the second man, who aimed his weapon at them. I said, "Don't move." The third man dashed toward the gift table exactly as they had planned and began grabbing boxes, envelopes, and jewelry bags, stuffing them into a black canvas sack. I didn't hesitate. There was no time to think, no time to wait for anyone else to react. While everyone else ducked under tables or froze in fear, I was already on the move. I locked my eyes on the man in the center. He looked like the leader, the one giving commands and holding his weapon with the most confidence. I moved in from the side, using the cover of a large banquet table to get closer without being seen. I was within 3 meters of him when I shouted, "Drop your weapon," and kicked the table hard, sending glasses and plates flying, jolting him into turning around. I used that moment to strike. From the right, I swept low, classic takedown technique. He lost his balance, staggered slightly. That was all I needed. I closed in fast, locked his gun arm under mine, and drove him to the ground with my full body weight. He thrashed and resisted, but I'd trained for exactly this. I twisted his wrist behind his back, forced his knee down with a sharp strike to his leg joint, and pinned him face first to the floor with my knee pressing down hard at the base of his skull. Just as I secured the leader, the second man saw what was happening and opened fire in my direction. The shot cracked through the air like a whip. I barely managed to roll to my right. The bullet grazed my shoulder, searing through the skin like a red-hot blade. Pain exploded across my upper arm, blood soaking through the fabric instantly, but I didn't stop. I held onto the disarmed gun, rolled again, and shouted at the top of my lungs. "Rick, execute the plan, lock all exits. 3 suspects at the gift table, move now." Seconds later, Rick's radio buzzed sharply. He and the resort's security team sprang into action. 2 black-suited guards surged out from the hallway, each targeting one of the remaining attackers. One suspect was tackled to the ground immediately. The last one drew a knife and bolted toward the rear exit, but it was too late. That door was now blocked by 3 guards armed with electric batons, ready for confrontation. Everything unraveled in seconds, chaotic, loud, thick with the acrid sting of gunpowder. Screams, shouts, breaking glass, flashing lights. The air itself felt like it was pulsing with fear and fury. I rushed toward the center of the hall, where my grandmother, the most fragile person in the room, was panicking amid a crowd of pushing, frightened guests. She was being held by a distant cousin, but I could clearly see her face had gone pale, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She had a history of heart problems. If no one calmed her down, this could escalate beyond fear. I crouched beside her, ignoring the blood dripping steadily from my shoulder. "Grandma, it's me, Maya. You're okay. Listen to me, breathe slowly. Look into my eyes. You're safe, I'm here." I held her hand tightly, shielding her from any possible threat. My other hand still gripped the handgun I'd taken from the leader, pulled behind me and ready to act if anything else went wrong. Even then, my eyes scanned the room, maintaining position, shouting over the chaos, "Everyone stay where you are. Do not move. Security has control." I don't remember how many times I shouted that. I don't remember how many heartbeats pulsed through my chest. All I know is that the sounds around me felt muffled, like they were trapped behind invisible glass. The sobbing. The panicked eyes. And above all, the face of my father frozen in place across the room, his lips parted without sound, his eyes fixed on the growing bloodstain spreading across my shoulder. He couldn't say a word. Just like all those years, he never once said my name without following it with a sigh or a critique. But this time, it was different. Because now he had seen it, seen his daughter step up when no one else dared to. Seen the same security guard he had once dismissed now protecting his entire family from disaster. And I knew, in that moment, there were no words he could say that would undo what he had just witnessed. Just as the last echoes of my command still rang in the air, a sudden motion froze my entire body. Through the lingering haze of smoke from the earlier shot, I spotted one of the suspects, the shorter, heavier man, face twisted in fear and rage, bolting toward the gift table area, where the lights had just come back on. He lunged forward, grabbed my father by the wrist, yanked him upright, and shoved the muzzle of a pistol against his temple. The air went still. I could hear Diana's shriek pierce the room, followed by the sharp crash of a glass falling somewhere behind me. "Give me the safe code. Now." The man screamed, his gun pressed hard to my father's head. "I know you're the one who booked this venue. Say the code." My father froze, his mouth agape, his face bleached white. In that instant, I saw the raw terror on the face of a man who had once looked down at me like I'd never be anything. For the first time, his gaze held no judgment. For the first time, he looked like someone vulnerable. And I moved forward as if on instinct, as if there were nothing else I could do except protect. Even though my head was spinning from blood loss, the wound in my left shoulder had begun to bleed heavily, my clothes no longer able to soak it up. I measured each step with precision. Each breath I took was calculated. Each inch between me and the gun was mapped in my mind. I raised my voice, steady despite the pain. "Don't do this. I know the code." The man turned toward me, squinting. "Who are you?" I raised my hand slowly, carefully. "Strategic security. I have backup access. The current safe code is dual layer, biometric and secondary PIN." He stared at me, unsure. The gun didn't move from my father's head. My father, meanwhile, was trembling, barely able to get words out. I don't remember. I need to check my phone." "I can open the safe," I said firmly. "But I need you to back away from him. I'm not carrying the biometric device on me, but I can retrieve it from the control point just a few meters away. You want the money, right? I'll help you get all of it, just let him go." I said it like I was luring him into trust, sweetening my tone to pull him closer. And then he did exactly what I wanted. He shoved my father aside and turned the gun toward me. "You go first, no tricks. End of 4. I stepped slowly toward him, hands raised shoulder high, silently counting the distance in my head. 3 meters, 2 meters, half a step. Perfect range. As soon as he glanced toward the door, checking to make sure no one was coming up behind him, I lowered my center of gravity, pivoted, and lunged forward. I grabbed his gun hand, pushing the muzzle away from me. A shot rang out, the bullet soared into the ceiling. I dropped low, wrapped my arm around his elbow, and twisted, forcing the weapon from his grip. He struggled violently, but I'd been through too many live combat drills to falter now. I rotated my hips, shifted my weight, and slammed him down, pressing my good shoulder into his chest and pinning him to the floor. The gun clattered away. He screamed, fists slamming against the tiled floor. I shouted, "Don't move." At that moment, the sound of pounding boots echoed from 3 directions. The hallway lights flared blinding white. Police, at least 4 officers, burst in through the main doors, semi-automatic rifles drawn, flashlight beams slicing through the smoky air, thick with adrenaline and tearful gasps. "Drop your weapons, hands in the air," an officer bellowed. The 3 remaining suspects were taken down in near-perfect coordination by security and police. I spotted Rick restraining one of them, his shirt soaked in sweat but his eyes burning with purpose. The man beneath me tried one last time to squirm free, but it only made me press harder, just before a police officer rushed in and cuffed him within seconds. I released my grip and backed away, my entire body crashing into exhaustion like I'd hit a steel wall. My vision blurred. The wound on my shoulder burned, searing like hot coal pressed into my skin. I staggered upright, one hand pressed against the drenched fabric over my shoulder. Then from somewhere in the chaos came the sound of clapping. Hesitant, faint, then dozens more. Then hundreds. A wave of applause broke through the dense air, full of gunpowder and adrenaline. But I didn't feel proud, I just felt drained. My eyes scanned the room. Chloe was frozen beside the wedding cake, her white dress soaked in spilled champagne. My stepmother, Diana, was clutching my grandmother tightly, crying openly. And in the center of the shattered ballroom, my father stood watching me. He didn't blink, his face was ghost white. And for the first time, I saw him take a trembling step toward me, with nothing at all to say. But I didn't wait for him to come closer. The police were already asking me to get my wound checked. I gave my father one last glance, a small nod. Not out of anger, not pride. Just a quiet acknowledgement of something that no longer needed to be said. You never truly saw me all these years, but today, I was here. I protected everyone. Even you. Then I turned away, leaving him standing there in the middle of the crowd applauding me, the daughter they had once dismissed for being just a security guard. I woke up the next morning in a small hotel room tucked behind the resort, the sharp scent of antiseptic still lingering in the air. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, striking directly across my left shoulder, now wrapped tightly in white gauze. Even the slightest movement sent waves of pain through the wound, pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I pushed myself up with one arm, still dizzy, my throat dry and raw like I'd swallowed sand. On the nightstand beside me, my phone buzzed incessantly, unread notifications piling up. Over 60 missed calls, hundreds of messages, and a long scroll of unopened emails. For a fleeting moment, I thought I might be dreaming. But then it all came back, every detail. The gunfire. The look in that man's eyes as he took my father hostage. The commanding voices of the officers charging in. The scent of my own blood soaking through the ceremonial outfit, now tossed in a crumpled heap in the corner. It was real, all of it. And there was no going back. I reached for my phone. A message from Alicia, my best friend back in DC, sent at 5 a.m. Screamed in all caps. Maya. Turn on the TV, CNN. Right now. I opened the news app instead. Right there, at the top of the homepage, was a bold red headline. Army veteran stands alone against armed robbers at wedding, saves dozens, including her own family. The video rolled, a 5-minute news segment. It opened with security footage, me, in a silver-gray jumpsuit, charging at the armed man, wrestling the gun away, blood staining my shoulder, eyes locked and unblinking. Another angle showed me cradling my grandmother, helping her breathe through the chaos. Then the footage of me taking down the man who had a gun to my father's head, pinning him until the police arrived to handcuff him. The anchor's voice was low and steady, filled with reverence. Samantha Maya Thompson, U.S. Army veteran and current strategic security specialist at Sentinel Global Security, single-handedly detected, alerted, and responded to an armed robbery attempt, saving dozens of guests during a high-profile wedding in Texas. Her actions were not only courageous, but executed with extraordinary professionalism, preventing mass panic and minimizing casualties. I sat frozen. Not out of pride, but from the raw, disorienting feeling of everything being turned upside down. A lifetime of being belittled, of having security guard said like it was something to be ashamed of, and now, that same role was the reason people were standing to applaud. I never craved recognition. I just wanted to do my job with integrity. But the way the media had suddenly turned me into a heroic story, it all felt so abrupt, so unfamiliar. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Martin Chen, my company's CEO. I didn't pick up. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I turned toward the window, where the Texas sunlight still beamed through like there hadn't been gunshots the night before. And then, there was a knock at the door. I opened it. A resort employee stood there holding a tray with hot tea and a folded morning newspaper. He smiled, slightly shy. "Complimentary breakfast, ma'am. And, well, everyone's talking about you. I just wanted to say thank you. My wife was at the wedding." He gave a small bow, then walked away. I stood there for a second, staring at the front page. A photo of me, slumped on the banquet floor, blood soaked into my shoulder, a police officer helping me to my feet. Below it, bold words in black print. Not a hero, just someone who did what had to be done. I stepped back inside, sat down on the edge of the bed. The phone buzzed again. A new message. A landline number with a local area code. The text read only one line. "Dad is downstairs in the hallway. If you have a moment, he'd like to talk." I hesitated. Then I stood up, carefully slipped on a jacket over my injured shoulder, and grabbed my water bottle. When I stepped out into the hallway, he was already there. No suit, no tie. Just a wrinkled white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled above the elbows, a few strands of gray hair falling loosely over his forehead. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, his expression unfamiliar and cautious. "You," he began, then faltered. His voice trembled slightly. "You saved all of us." I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, the man who had scoffed at me when I walked into the wedding, the man who once introduced me as just a security guard, like it was something shameful. Now he stood in front of me with no performance, no polished words. Only the weight of regret, visible in every blink. "I didn't do it for you," I said slowly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. For Grandma. For the people who couldn't protect themselves. And because I couldn't live with myself if I turned away from that, no matter how many times you turned away from me." He nodded. No excuses, no defense. Just a nod. Maybe, for the first time, he truly heard me and chose to listen. Silence settled between us for a few long seconds. Not heavy, not bitter. Just necessary. A silence that, truthfully, we should have had a long time ago. We walked in silence down the long wooden hallway that led to the top-floor lounge of the resort. It was quiet there, almost eerily so. A few armchairs sat scattered around the room, and soft morning light poured through the glass walls, casting floating dust particles into sharp relief, everything so still, so calm, it felt unreal. As if the night before had been nothing more than a violent dream I'd just woken from. I picked a seat near the window, where I could see the southern Texas horizon stretched like a ribbon across the distant plains. My father sat across from me, slowly, his hands laced together on his knees, shoulders slightly hunched. He no longer looked like the proud Charles Thompson, he looked like an aging father trying, after years of silence, to step into his daughter's life. "Dad," I began, my voice rough but steady. "I don't need you to be proud of me today." I paused and met his gaze directly. "I need you to listen, to understand, and to respect me. From before. From when I wasn't on the news. From when I was just the girl in a uniform working behind the scenes at conferences. From when I chose a path you never even wanted to look at." He didn't speak. His eyes didn't leave mine, but this time, something in them had shifted. There was no more defensiveness, no more prideful distance, only exhaustion. And regret. "I know," he said quietly. "I spent my whole life believing there was only one way to be called successful. The kind that wears suits, sits in boardrooms, owns real estate and reputation. I believed in that path so deeply that I convinced myself if my children didn't follow it, they were doing it wrong." I said nothing. He sighed and rubbed his forehead, as if trying to wipe away the last 10 years of mistakes. "I didn't understand your world," he admitted, voice slightly trembling. "Didn't understand the codes in your security plans, the night shifts, the events you guarded without anyone ever seeing. I didn't understand, so I dismissed it. And I let that ignorance become contempt. It became distance." I took a deep breath. My shoulder ached with each inhale, but the pain this time wasn't just physical. "You know," I said, eyes dropping to my hands. "There was a time I thought, if I died on a mission, you'd only remember me as the security guard. Not as the daughter who tried her best to live with integrity." I looked up, not flinching. "I've always had value. Whether in a suit or in a security uniform, worth isn't in the title. It's in how you live. And I've lived with purpose." His eyes blinked slowly. Then blurred. He lowered his head, his fingers tightening around each other. "And then something I never thought I would witness happened." He cried. Not the loud, crumbling kind of sobbing, but silent tears running down the weathered lines of his face. He didn't hide it, he didn't try to stop it, he just let it fall honest, raw. "All these years," he choked out, "I missed so many chances to understand you. To show up when you got your degree, to call when I saw your name on the department's commendation list. To simply say, 'I'm proud of you.'" He wiped at his tears, trying to steady his breath. I was too busy drawing up my idea of what success was supposed to look like. Too busy chasing that perfect image to ever stop and ask you, "What do you want?" I didn't speak. My throat was tight, not from pain, but from a quiet warmth just beginning to stir in a place that had been frozen over for years. That strange sensation when an old part of you, one that had been hurt, angry, and silent, starts to soften. He reached for my hand, still trembling. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to change. If you'll let me. I want to start over. Not as the father who teaches, but as the father who learns how to see you. Just as you are. He gave a faint smile, tinged with sadness and hope. A strong woman. Not because you were on the news, but because you chose to live with integrity, even when no one was watching. I squeezed his hand gently. I didn't say, I forgive you, and I didn't say, I'm still hurt. I just held on like a daughter saying, I'm willing to open the door, it won't be easy. But it's possible. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, casting a warm golden glow across the lounge floor like a soft woven rug. That conversation didn't erase the years of coldness. It didn't undo the times I was dismissed. But it was a beginning, an important one. A moment where dignity was recognized, and love was finally given space to take root. And I knew this, not the media coverage, not the applause. This moment of truth was the real reward for everything I had endured. A year after that day, my life didn't transform into a fairy tale. There were no hundreds of apologies, no magic that made everything perfect. But it changed in a real way, quietly, deeply, and bit by bit, like underground water slowly finding its way back to the surface. After years of standing in the shadows, protecting other people's spotlights, I was entrusted with a new role. The leadership at Sentinel Global Security promoted me to head of tactical event security training, a position previously reserved for former FBI agents or high-ranking military officers. I wasn't the one with the most elite credentials or powerful connections. But I was chosen for the very qualities I was once mocked for. Calm in the face of chaos, clarity in silence, and the ability to act when no one else would. The first time I stepped onto a major stage to speak at a national security conference, the room held over 300 delegates, representatives from companies, government agencies, and media outlets. I wore a well-fitted suit, nothing fancy, no jewelry, just the old military watch I always kept as a reminder of where I started. And when I looked down at the front row, I saw him. My father. Sitting among the guests. No camera in hand, no one by his side to show off his daughter. He just sat there, back straight, silent, and when I finished my presentation, he was the first to clap. Not loudly, not theatrically, but sincerely. From a man who once didn't believe I could ever do anything meaningful with my life. And in that moment, I knew it was the first time he wasn't just looking at me. He was seeing me. A year later, I was invited to speak at a quiet ceremony honoring individuals who had performed acts of bravery in Texas. It wasn't broadcast on television. There were no evening gowns, no red carpets. Just a room full of people who, in a critical moment, chose to act for others rather than seek safety for themselves. And when I stepped up to the podium, I didn't read a prepared speech. I spoke from what I had lived. I used to think success was being recognized, having someone stand up and say you were worthy. But in truth, success isn't about being acknowledged by others. Success is having the courage to live by your own values even when no one else understands them. It's continuing to move forward even after you've been dismissed, underestimated, or placed at the outer edges of someone else's life. And sometimes, to keep going, you have to be the first person to see the light within yourself. The hall went quiet for a long moment before the applause broke out, but this time, I didn't need the applause to know I was on the right path. I had known it for a while, since the moment I stepped out from the shadows of doubt and stood in the light of my own integrity. Don't let others define your worth by titles, name tags, or appearances. You don't need recognition to have value. You can be silent and still shine. Walk the path you believe in even if others mock it, because that is what truly makes you who you are.